Now it's broadcasting on YouTube as well, live. Great. Oh, okay. אוקיי. ערב טוב מור, שמח לראות אותך פה. אנחנו נחכה, אנחנו כבר מוכנים, פול עדיין, פול איתנו. Can you see my video? אני לא רואה את הוידאו שלך, מור, אני לא יודע בדיוק על מה אתה מדבר, אבל אנחנו תכף נמתין עוד איזה, בוא נגיד דקה, שתיים שיכנסו, אני רואה שנכנסים עוד ועוד אנשים, אז אנחנו נתחיל, אנחנו מוכנים, כבר אנחנו נתחיל ממש עוד כמה רגעים. בינתיים אני אכין גם כן את הדברים אצלי. אוקיי. אוקיי, חברים, מי שהגיע, תכף אנחנו נתחיל, ממש עוד דקה אנחנו כבר מתחילים. נכון, זה לא פגישה, הזום, מור, בקשר לשאלה שלך, כן, נכון, זה פגישה זה בעצם וובינר, זה לא פגישת זום רגילה, ולכן אתם רואים אותנו ואנחנו לא רואים אתכם. אוקיי, אז זה הפורמט בעצם שהתחברתי לזום. אוקיי, אז חברים, ערב טוב לכולם, אנחנו כבר מתחילים, כל מי שהגיע, תודה רבה. זה בעצם עוד אחד מסדרת הוובינרים שאני מקיים עם כל מיני גורואים, אנשים שהם בעצם מומחים בתחומם בעולם. לשמחתי, כמו שאני אומר את זה כל פעם, אני פונה אליהם ורובם נענים לבקשה שלי להצטרף ולהשתתף בוובינר לקהל הישראלי. נכון שהם לא מדברים עברית, אבל בדרך כלל אלה שמציגים, הם משמשים בכלל בתפקיד שלהם ובעסק שלהם בתור מדריכים, ולכן יש להם גם יכולת הדרכה באנגלית שכל אחד יכול להבין, כולל כמובן שיתוף מסך, ואז בעצם זה משלים את התמונה המלאה. אז קודם כל אני אציג את עצמי, שמי שלומי, אני מנכ"ל חברת יוניק, החברה שלי מתמחה בפתרונות, החברה שלי בעצם מתמחה בפתרונות של פאוור בי-איי ואקסל לחברות ועסקים. אוקיי, בואו נשתף את המסך הזה ואז אתם תראו. אוקיי, אתם מוזמנים, כמובן, אתם מוזמנים לאתר שלי. יש גם אתר יוטיוב שכרגע אנחנו משודרים בלייב, The Excel Studio, אוקיי, שאחר כך אני אעלה גם גרסה יותר מסודרת של הוובינר הזה. ואני רוצה קודם כל לדבר על פול, אוקיי, פול קלי. הוא בעצם מומחה בתחום של VBA, מומחה עולמי, הוא התעסק המון שנים בתכנות של VBA לחברות ועסקים, ובעצם הוא עשה איזשהו צעד לפני כמה שנים לתחום של הדרכה והוראה של התחום הזה של VBA, Excel VBA, וכמו שאתם רואים באתר שלו יש לו גם מאמרים, אוקיי, יש לו מאמרים פה, גם האתר שלו הוא בעצם אתר או שהוא מלא בכל טוב, בוא נגיד, מי שמתעסק עם אקסל ורוצה להיכנס לתחום של VBA, כמובן אנגלית פה דרושה, אז בעצם האתר הזה הוא אוצר, ממש אוצר שלם, ויש לו גם קורסים שהוא מציע, אתם יודעים, גם הוא צריך להתפרנס איכשהו, אז הוא מציע קורסים עם קורסים מובנים, ויש לו גם אתר, יש לו גם ערוץ יוטיוב שלו, ואתם תשימו לב גם בערוץ שלו וגם במאמרים שהוא מסביר דברים מאוד מאוד בצורה מאוד פשוטה, והוא מביא בעצם את הדברים לגובה העיניים. עכשיו אני רוצה להגיד ערב טוב לפול קלי. Good evening, Paul, from
Good evening.
Vietnam.
Yeah, I'm coming from Vietnam, yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you to join me to my webinar, to agree to join me to my webinar. I will pass to you the microphone. You can tell the audience, the Israeli audience, a few words on yourself, and let's start the webinar.
Sure. So my name is Paul Kelly, and I own the Excel Macro Mastery website, which we've just looked at. And I set this up a few years ago because I worked for many years as a software engineer. And when I was doing a big project in VBA, I got very frustrated because all the material on VBA was like very, very shallow. So when you wanted to find out good information about creating professional products, it was very difficult to find that information. And so I kind of stumbled on all this information in different places. And sometimes then things like when you copy from a range, say, to an array, this was like kind of a big thing for me because it's a big speed thing. And when you find something like that and then realize that it's not on any website anywhere, or maybe you just find it in some remote part of the web. So I wanted to create a website that had kind of all the practical information in one place. And so I started the website in 2015, and it grew very quickly because I think a lot of kind of professional people that were doing serious work with VBA wanted to kind of find out, okay, how do we do this and kind of have it in one place. So that's kind of my background with VBA.
I think I can say that we waited a long time, a long years, many years to your website in order to understand a more complex VBA subject in a very simple way, as you can explain the material.
Yeah, it was always my thing as well. Like when I was learning like all the different languages, it's always kind of hard to find like a simple explanation. So there tends to be like when someone explains programming, they tend to use a lot of jargon, and also there's a lot of kind of theory in it. It's like you should use it this way because of that, whereas you just want like a practical solution. You're kind of like, well, I want to do this. How do I do it? So it seems very hard to kind of get that information. So we always like to break things down into like, this is why you use something, and this is when you use it and when you don't need to use it. So often a language like everything can have parts, and some parts really you don't ever need to use, and then other parts you'll use them probably for a considerable amount of your work. So it's really trying to figure out what those are.
Great. So I make you the host of the webinar, so you can now share your screen and start explaining the subject we all gathered.
Yeah, no problem at all. So let me just. So I saw the button earlier. Is there a button for me to share the screen? I saw it earlier. I don't have it at the moment.
Okay. It's on the. You can see. You can see in the underneath near the chat. Near the chat.
No. No. The last way that you had it, I could, but I don't see it at the moment. Let me just bring it up. Oh yeah, sorry, I have it here now. Yeah, sorry, it just jumped down.
I just want to say though to the audience, if you have any question, you can put it on the chat box, and I think Paul will answer that later on. אוקיי, אם יש לכם שאלות, אתם יכולים לרשום בצ'אט, ופול יענה לכם בהמשך. אוקיי, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let me just move this over here. And let me just start with my first slide. So so today's webinar is on the VBA class modules. So it's going to explain what are class modules, why do we need them, what's the point in using them, and I'm going to show you some simple examples of how to use them. And then I'm going to finish with 2 practical examples. So a lot of the times, class modules, they're kind of explained with the kind of theory and this is what they do. But unless you really can see how to use them in a real practical situation, then it's not really much use. So that's what we're going to do today. So these are 2 useful articles from my website: VBA Class Modules, The Ultimate Guide, and VBA Objects. So class modules and objects go together, so it's very important to understand both. Now, I also have a YouTube channel, and on the YouTube channel, I've got a playlist with class modules. So there's about 3 videos there. Again, 1 is on objects, and there's 2 on class modules. So they're worth looking at as well if you just want to get the reference. So what are class modules? So what we're essentially trying to do is, let me just move this over to my other screen. So what we're essentially trying to do when we use class modules is that we're trying to avoid code like this. That's kind of spaghetti code that's kind of all mixed together. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create code like this that's in blocks. So when it's in blocks, it's much easier to manage. So we can think of it like a black box. An object is something that has inputs. We don't really know what's going on inside the black box, and then we get expected outputs. So an example of this is like when we open a workbook. So a workbook is an object in VBA. And when we open a workbook, we're basically giving it an input as the file name. And what we're doing is we're expecting that it will open the workbook. So we don't know what's going on inside. We don't have any access to the code. So the point is that this is just kind of a block that does something. And we can interact with other blocks, but it interacts with its inputs and outputs. So that's different than, say, code where we just write like a lot of code that's doing many different things and it's interacting with all different parts. So as I said, in VBA, we've got objects, and these objects are things like the workbook, the worksheet, the range, and so on. So we can think of these as objects. And what class modules allows us to do is it allows us to create our own objects. So the advantages of using them, and before we see the advantages, it's more important that what we do is we actually look at an actual object working, and then we can kind of, it makes sense to us to see this advantage. So we're going to have a sub here, and we're going to just say collection. So the collection is an object in VBA. And how we use it is we say dim call as new collection. So dim is our declaration. Call is any variable name we want to give it. And then we say as new, and new creates the new object. So every time we use new, a new object is created. So when we use our collection, we can see that we can add an item. So we can add like banana, say, for example, and we can add apple. But the key point that we have here is that we don't actually know what's going on inside. We're just basically saying to this collection, we're saying add the banana and add the apple. And we don't know how it's stored. We don't know what's happening inside. We just know that it's going to do it for us. So if we want to get back, say, the number of items, again, we use count. So again, we're using something from the collection, but again, we don't know what's inside. So we don't know how it comes, how it gets the count, what way it does it. So if we bring up our immediate window and we run this code, you can see that it prints out 2. So there's 2 items. Now we can also get back one of the items by using call item. And let's say, we'll say 1, for example. And that brings us back banana. You can see there in the immediate window. So the whole point with this object is that it does one thing really. It just stores all our list of items. And everything it does is based around the list of items. So this is like a really good object. And it gives us back the count of items, gives us back 1 item if we want it. And we can also remove, which is another thing that we do with the collection. So this is very nice object. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this object is that the code here, obviously we can't see the collection code, but the code doesn't interact with anything in our code. So in other words, it's not referencing any of our subs and stuff like that. So what this means is that we can easily move this collection to any workbook that we have, and we don't need to worry about breaking code somewhere else. So we don't need to worry that we have to take all these different bits of code somewhere else to get this to work. We know we can just take the collection on its own. So this is essentially what a nice object is. And what we do then with the actual class modules is we create our own objects. So if we have a look back at the advantages then, having seen how the collection works. So the advantage of having the class module is that we don't have to write the same code again and again. So we write the code within the class module, and then we can call it from many places. We can use it in different workbooks, but we're not rewriting the code again and again. If the code changes, we can update that code. And as long as we don't change the interface, it won't break what's there. So as I said, it's easy to add a class module to another workbook. So we can just take it, we can just drop it in. So changing inside the class doesn't cause the problems anywhere else. As long as we keep our interface the same, it should work fine and it shouldn't break all the other code. Now the new keyword that I showed, this allows us to create many objects, and we'll look at that a bit later. So this means that we can change the behavior dynamically, or as our code is running, we can create new objects and these can have different behaviors. So that gives us a lot of power with our code. And so there's a lot of other advantages that we have with class modules, but you only really see them when you've been using class modules for a while. And you can kind of see, as you get more advanced into them, you can kind of see the other advantages that they have. So even though all the theory and everything is great, it's when you start using class modules yourself that it really opens your mind to how powerful they are. So sometimes people want to they look at a lot of videos and they read a lot about it, and they just don't get why they're so important. And the thing is, like, the final way to learn this is to actually go and use them, and then you'll start to really see the benefits. So that was using the collection. So if we want to use for example, if we want to use a class module ourselves, so let's create just a normal module here and we'll use it ourselves. So we want to create a class module. What we do here is we right click anywhere and we select insert and we select class module. And so we've got our class module. So we can change the name down here, and I'll change it to CLS customer just to make it a bit clearer. And what we can do then is our class module is kind of like a standard module in that we can put any kind of variable in it or any sub or function, but apart from that, it's quite different. So we say public, and we can say first name as string. So we've got a variable, the first name as the string. And then we'll say variable last name as the string. So how we would use this module is as follows. So let's say use cust. So how we would use this is as follows. We would say dim, and we'd say customer as new CLS customer. So that takes our class module as kind of a prototype, and it creates a new object based on that class. Now, the correct way we say it is it creates a new instance of that object, but it's really the same thing. And now once we have the new object, we say customer.firstname equals, and we can say Jack, for example. And then we have that value in our first name. And then we can read that back in the same way. We can debug print, and we can say customer. And this should write it out to our immediate window. So let's clear what's there. And let's run this code. Now it's gone, something's gone wrong. That should be customer first name. And we run that, and you can see that it printed out the result in the immediate window. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you're starting to use class modules or you want to understand them, I really recommend that you start with a simple example like this. Just start with a very basic example, and then add a bit more to it and a bit more to it. The worst thing to do is like to start and try using it with an existing project, because then you can kind of get very confused. But if you just start playing around in a new workbook, then you can actually learn a lot by just debugging through the code. Now, the key thing to keep in mind, as I said, is that when we use new, we're creating a new object. So this is kind of different than how a lot of stuff works in VBA. So we say customer2 as new. And so what this means is that we're creating actually a second object. So VBA will create a second object in memory. And that second object will be different than the first object. So normally in VBA, if we create, if we have a variable, we don't have to use new, because basically the variable is like a cell in memory. The variable just holds a value, but an object is doing more stuff under the hood. So we use new, and new basically creates it in memory. Now we've got two customers here. And if we do customer2 here and the first name, and then we'll just write out this code. And you can see that it wrote out Jack and Jill. So, so each time we use new, we create a new customer. Now we'll have more about using set and new in a moment. But one other thing that we can do with our customer then is that we can have some kind of sub. So we could have sub, and we could say join name, or we'll just say full name. And this is our sub, and this is actually a function because we're returning a value. And we're saying full name that equals the first name, and that equals the last name. Now, let me just get that. And what that will do is it will return a string, which is the full name. So let's go back to module 2, and we'll just copy this code, and we'll just go down here. So we're going to get rid of customer 2, and customer 1 then will use the last name. And we'll just say Jack Smith. And what we can do is then have a variable, we'll say it's just name as string, and we say name equals customer, and we want the full name back. And then of course we're going to print this out. So we print F5, and you can see that it printed out Jack Smith. So you can see that we use new to create a new customer, and then we can just set values like first name, just like normal variables. And then we can call a sub from that object. So we can call the full name, and that will give us back the name. Now, anytime we use customer, you can see customer 1, and we do the dot, you can see here, now maybe I'll make this a bit bigger. Yeah, so let me just, yeah. So you can see the full name here, the first name and the last name. So, excuse me, the IntelliJ Sense brings up all the different members, which is very, very useful. So if we go back to our class module and say we just had another one, say we just added something else. So say we added the sub, and we said, say print details, let's say. And when we go back to this one, then we can just press dot, and you can see that print details is now there as the last object. So this is quite a useful way, or this kind of shows the power that we have with the object. We can make changes, and we can see straight away that they actually appear in the IntelliJ Sense, that they're available for us. So this is the basics of creating a object using a class module. Now, one important thing that we need to understand is the difference between set. So this is one of the things when I started started using kind of object-oriented code, that it's not obvious when you come to VBA. So if we now, I just wonder if everything is I'm not going too advanced with this. Is this okay? Does everybody understand so far? So if it's, just let me know if it's too advanced, and I can slow it down a bit.
No, but I think it's great.
Yeah. Okay. No, I just like to check after a while so that I don't lose everyone.
Yeah,
Okay.
I forgot.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah.
אם יש לכם שאלות, אתם מוזמנים כמובן לרשום בצ'אט, ואם לא, אז אפשר להמשיך. אוקיי, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we have these lines here like this. So we've got dim customer 1 as a new customer. And what we can do then is set customer. Now I can actually get rid of the 1 here. I was just using 1 because we had a second one. So we can say customer. Now this is recognizing my other customer. And that's because if ever the IntelliSense doesn't work, so it doesn't, when I do control space, it doesn't bring up what I'm looking for. Whenever that doesn't work, that means that you've got an error. So if you do debug from the menu and compile, it will find your error. Now in this case, my error is just that these have the same name. So now when I go back here and type T, and yeah, it finishes customer. So that's just a useful tip. So we set the customer equals to new CLS customer. And now in the first line, we don't use new. So these two, so the first line here, and then the second one has 2 lines. Now these essentially do the same thing at first glance. So what they're basically doing is they're creating a new object. The object is of the type customer, and then they're placing that in a variable. Now what they're actually really doing is it just places the address of that variable, of that object in memory in this variable. But VBA does this seamlessly, so you never really need to know about that. And the second one, what it's doing is creating the variable of that type, but the variable is empty. But only when we use set does it actually set it to something. Now, the big advantage of this is that when we use set, what this means is that we can set on a condition. So we can set if a certain condition is met. And secondly, we can do it in a for loop. So we could create it like 10 times. So let's have a look at an example. So we can create dim I as long, and for I equals, say, 1, 2, 5. And we'll do a next I on that. So we create a new customer, and let's say the first name equals, and we'll say at this time, we'll say equals John, and we'll say plus I. So what happens there is that we're creating a new customer each time. So when I equals 1, we create a new customer. When I equals 2. Now, if we use the first line here, dim customer as new, this means we'll only ever have 1 customer. So we always have 1 instance of a customer. So when we use set, we can have multiple. But as I said, set is very useful because we can do it dynamically. So we could say if we were reading a report with 10 customers, we can create 10 objects. And if we're reading a report with 100 customers, we can create 100 objects. So we can write code that will work no matter how many customers we have. So let's step through the code so we can see exactly what's going on. Now we set the customer equal to a new customer. So let's look in our watch window. So that's all view H. And we can just double click the customer and drop it in. And then what we do is we hit on the plus so that we can see, hold on, let me double click that again. We click on the plus sign. Plus always means that there's more to see. And you can see first name, last name. So we have the customer, but there's nothing in it. And we set the first name to John. You can see now that the first name is John 1. So we go to the next one. We set customer to equal to new customer. And now we set John, and John equals 2. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that, so each time we set customer to the new customer, what's actually happening is VBA is creating a new customer in memory. And the customer it was previously pointing to. So I said customer had the address. So the one that was previously referencing, this no longer has anything referenced in it once we've set it to something else, and VBA will automatically delete it. So each time I set a new one here, I'm actually deleting the previous one. So what this means in simple terms is that every time we create a new object, we have to store it somewhere. And typically we'd store it in like a collection or a dictionary. So we just add it like this. And so we just have to declare this up here. Let me just move this across slightly. And we just declare our collection as we saw already. And collection like this. So let's run our code again. And this time we'll look at our collection. So we've added one item. And item 1 is John 1, you can see, and it's customer 1. And we go back into our loop and we set customer. So you see customer no longer points at the first one, but you can see the first one is in our collection. And we set it to John 2. So customer is now John 2. We've added that to our collection and you can see our collection now has 1 and 2. And then we set this customer to something else. So the customer is like kind of a temporary variable. We create a new object with it, and then we put the object in a collection, and then we go back and we create a new one. So this is really the power of creating the new objects and using set to do so. And when we finally leave here, we'll have our 5 objects. And you can see we've item 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as you can see. So this is kind of a basic guide to how to use class modules, what set and new is about. So if you look in my article on VBA objects, if you just want to know a bit more about set and new and how they work, so it's quite important. Once you understand set and new, then it's much easier to deal with the objects. So now I'm going to show 2 practical examples. And this is where you can see how classes really benefit. So what I'm showing here is kind of theoretical in that we can do this stuff with a class, but you can't really see, okay, what's the benefit of this really over using a class or using just say normal code instead of a class. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look back at our collection. So remember we had a collection at the start, and let's add a couple of more items to our collection. So let's add, we'll say plum. And let's add mango. So we've got 4 items here. And the problem is with the collection in VBA is that compared to other languages, it's very limited. We don't have a sort function. We don't have many different functions that you'd expect in a standard language. So what we can do is we can, for example, we can create our own. So on my website under collection, you'll find that there's a quick sort. So we can take this quick sort function and we can use it. So we can just pop the quick sort in here like this. We paste it in. And then we can use quick sort up here. So quick sort call the first item, and we want to do the last item as well. And what we might want to do after this is we might want to say, okay, let's have just a test look at what's in our collection. So rather than having to look in the watch window, let's print it out. So let's print items, we'll say. We'll call this one print items. And so we create another sub that prints items. And this sub will take a collection. And it'll also take text so that we can just give it a quick explanation. And this will be quite straightforward. We just do debug VB new line and text. And then we do a for each loop to read through our collection. So item is a variant. And we say for each item in the collection, what we want to do is just print it out. That's item. And then we do a next. Now do a debug compile, make sure everything is okay. And I just have to add my arguments. I'll do a debug compile again. That should actually be, so print items, what I'm just saying is after sort, so that I know that it's after sort. And then I can print it out before the sort, so that I know it's before the sort. So we run this code, and you can see that it's printed it out and it's sorted and everything works okay. But the problem with this code is that it's a bit messy because there's no real connection between print items and the quick sort and the collection. And every time we've got to remember that we will have to take the code from somewhere. So if we want to use the collection we want to sort, we have to remember always to be copying this code in. So what would be much nicer is if we had our own collection class that had the sort. And how we can do it is we create what we call a wrapper class. So we create a class that is essentially the collection, but what it actually does is it has the extra functions we need. So how we'll do this is we insert a class module, and then we'll start off by having a private member, and that private member will be a collection. And so what we want to do is we'll want to have a public sub that will add. So we'll add an item, and all this is really doing is it's going to pass it on to our collection. So it's really at this point just mimicking what our collection is doing. Now we're going to do the two other things. We're going to do the item and we're going to do the count. So we'll just ignore remove. So I insert a procedure, and this is going to be a property. So property in a class is very similar to a sub. It's just kind of a special type of sub and function. And what it does is it allows us to basically say, assign a value. So to set a value and to get the value back. So this one is going to be, we'll start off with say item. So there's a get and a let. So let allows us to set the value. We don't want to do that. We're just going to use a get, which returns the value. So get is the same basically as having a function that returns the value. But we use the property, and it's quite subtle. So if you look on my website and have a look at the class modules blog post that I've done, you can see the explanation why we use it. It's quite subtle, but if you see the example, you'll see that there's a good reason for doing so. So we want to get back the item as a variant. And again, all we're doing is we're saying item, give me the item in our actual collection that we're storing. And of course, we're going to have to tell it which one we want. And so we have index as long. Now I'll show you where all this is going in a second. And we create this one, and this is going to be count. And count returns a long. And as you probably guessed, it's just going to return the count in our collection. And we set our collection as new here. And we're going to just call it, we'll just call it PK collection. So if we return to our code that we have here, and let me see, where did I put that code, or the code we have in module 1. And let's leave out the quick sort and the print items for a moment. And we'll just put in these lines here. So what you'll see is that we're going to change this to PK collection. And what you'll see is that this works exactly the same as it worked before. So this, we're basically passing everything to the collection. So at the moment, it's acting just like a collection. So it passed us back 4 items. It gave us the item at position 1, which is banana, and it added all the items. So far it's the same. So where we can really get good now is we can take the print items and we can go to our collection and we can put it here. We don't have to pass the collection. And now we've got our print items. So we go back to the code. We can just call our column again like this. And we can see that we've now got print items. And we can run the code. And print items has text as a string, and I'd say before sort. And for each item, so that should be just m_col. So then we run that again just to make it clearer. So we've added the print items, we run it again, and you can see that it prints them all out. Now the beauty of this is, as I said, we can do call like this, and anywhere we use our new collection, we can see what's available in the IntelliSense. It tells us, okay, we have our print items. So we'll do the same thing with the sort. We'll add our sort into there. So let's take this sort. And we'll put the sort here like this. Now the sort is a little bit tricky in this case because it takes different parameters. It's what we call a recursive function. So we're just going to simplify this completely. We'll just say sort here, and we'll actually do the quick sort call here. So this is all hidden from our so whoever is calling it, and we'll say 1 is first, we'll say mcall is last. So this is all hitting from whoever's the caller. So we'll make the actual quick sort itself private. That means it won't show up in IntelliSense. And so we can go here then, and we go call dot, and we can say sort. And then we'll say call dot print items after sort. And then we run this. So let me bring up our immediate window. And let me just comment out these two lines. So we run this code, and now you can see it does the before sort and after sort. And what you can see is that this code is much neater. And we can see also that anytime we use call, we can see by the IntelliSense what is available. Now, another thing is, imagine I give this to you and you're using it in your code all the time. And then you say, you know what would be really cool is imagine we had a reverse function. So all you've got to do then is, or all I would have to do then is just write a reverse function. And I have one here just handy. And we'll put the reverse function in. And then I send you the code with the reverse function in. And you don't have to change anything. If you don't want to use it in your code, that's fine. Your code will still work perfect with the new update. But if you decide that you want to reverse, then you can do a call reverse like this. And the call reverse is now there. And so let's print items after, we'll do print after reverse. So let's delete all this. And let's print after reverse. So let me just, and you can see that it did the sort and then it did the reverse. So this is just one thing that we do with classes. We call it like a class wrapper, where we take an existing class and we extend it to make it much easier to use, or to make it have much more powerful. And then once it's in a class, it's very easy for us to just pass this around. So there's one example of this in that if you're using VBA on the Mac, you can't actually use the dictionary because it's a Windows scripting library. So what some people have done is they've written their own dictionary. And so what they do is they just put the dictionary as a CLS file, and then basically anybody can come along and drop it into their class modules, and that dictionary will work just like the normal dictionary. So that's the first example. So now the second example is a different one again. So let me look at this. So what we have is we've got a list of books, and what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to filter. So every time I type a letter, I want to filter, but not just by the first letter, by any, just if it appears anywhere in the string. So I can do something like CASTLE for castle, and you can see that it puts the castle in. And then if I type BY, it will, they're all actually BY, but let's say by D, and you can see that it filters it further down. And you could also like pick authors if we wanted to do like Tolkien, for example. So essentially it's just, or we wanted to do something with sword. So essentially it's just a filter. Now, the thing about this is I wrote the code to do this, and somebody said to me, you know, this is really good, but the problem was all the code was in the user form. So all the code was in the actual user form in the original version. And there's a lot of code because it's a complex thing to do the resize and everything. So there's all this code was in their user form. So what it meant was every time that they create a new user form and they want to use this functionality, they have to copy all that code in. And the problem with copying all that code in is that it mixes up with their code and it gets messy. The other problem is that every time that they create a new user form, so if they had like 10 user forms, they have to copy that code into all the user forms. So they said to me, is there an easier way to do it? And the easier way to do it is to put it in a class. And so when we have the functionality in a class, we take it away from the user form, and then we just need to use this list box in a class where someone wants to use the user form. So just to show you how simple it is, I'm going to create a new workbook. And we've got books here. So let's create a new workbook. And let's copy all this here into our new workbook. And let's just make this, let's just drag this out. So we've copied all this into our new workbook. And so let me Let me just hide these things here just to make it clear. And what we're going to do is we want to use that list box in our new user form. So we've created a user form and we want to use that functionality that I've just shown. So what we do first of all is we can just take the search box and drag it into this project. So now we have the functionality here and the instructions are here. They're quite straightforward. We basically just copy this into our user form. So this is just a bit of code that hooks it up and we'll then just uncomment and we'll just move it in one. Then we go to our user form and we need to create two controls. So we need a text box and we need a list box. Now let's just make these a bit bigger so that we will be able to see them. I'll make this one wide as well. Yeah, so we just do them like that. And so what I'm going to do is just make the font a bit bigger on these because just to make it clearer on the screen. So you don't, this is a step you don't need to do, but I'm just doing it to make it clear on the screen. And I'll just pull this down as well, just to make it a bit bigger. So we've added the user form and then we've just one bit of code left. This code is actually just to call it and we'll be using this code pretty much anyway. So we insert a standard module, which will be called in our user form. So let's call the form. And we'd be using this code anyway, anywhere that we're using a user form. So this is the kind of extra line. And what this extra line simply does is it takes whatever the range is and it passes the range to the form and then it shows the form. So if we run this code now and we type in castle, you can see that it has the functionality already, just like that. And as I said, the real beauty of it is that we don't have to copy in all the code. We don't have to do anything messy. We just have to add a simple bit of connecting code into our user form. And all the code for the search list box is all here. So all the complicated code is all here. And if I give this to you, you don't need to worry about how it works or anything. All you've just got to do is put a small bit of code in your user form to connect it, put in your list box, text box, and it will just work like that. And as I said, the other big advantage is if you have 10 user forms, you basically just use the same small bit of code in each user form. You don't have to copy all that code from the search list box. You don't have to copy that code everywhere. It's just one instance of that code that's used. So you can see how powerful that is. So that concludes really what I wanted to cover today. So I just want to give just a bit of a recap. So we looked at the class modules, why they're used, and we looked at the advantages of using them and what they are really, essentially, that they're objects and that we use class modules to create our own objects. And then we looked at kind of the basics of using them, how we can create our own, how we have simple ones. And if you want to learn more, it's good to just create your own simple ones and play around with them and then get more advanced as you become better. And then at the end, we looked at two kind of real world examples of what we can do with class modules. But these are only two possibilities. There's like a lot more that we can do with class modules. And I'm really just kind of scraping the surface here. But I think they're two very useful examples of explaining what exactly class modules are. So so if there's any questions anybody has, please feel free to go ahead and ask. Maybe there was some there that I didn't see, but
כן, אם יש לכם שאלות, זה הזמן חברים, לשאול. So basically the class is making the solution more dynamically and less writing over and over code.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages of it, yeah. But the dynamic thing is important. When you get kind of to more advanced stuff, you can have different classes. And so say, here's an example. Imagine you're like writing, you have a class and you want to send an email. So you want to send an email through Outlook. And then what you can actually do at runtime is you can actually pass in the object that does the email. But then what you could do is say, someone says, okay, we want to use Gmail sometimes. So when the code is running, you can say, if the person wants Gmail, create this object and pass it And if the person wants Outlook, create this object. And when you write that structure, then if someone comes along and says, okay, I've got another class or got another email client that we want to use, it's very simple to just create that class, add it in, and it will just fit in with what you already have.
Wow, it's a very powerful.
Yeah, so if you were doing that traditionally, you'd like have all these if statements, and you get very much bogged down because you're stuck with your if statement here and if statement there. But because when they're classes and you can create them, it just makes them very flexible. You know, you can create one here and pass it over here.
Wow. Great. Very, very, very interesting and very powerful.
Yeah.
אוקיי, חברים, אם אין שאלות, אז אני רוצה להודות ולסגור את הוובינר הזה. I want to thank you, Paul, very, very much. It was very, very interesting webinar. It's a complicated subject that with this example you showed us, and on your website, on your blog, I think even a beginner VBA programmer can learn about this subject. I can tell you I did. So I want to thank you very much. ותודה לכל מי שהגיע והקשיב וצפה בנו. תודה גדעון, תודה מור ולכל החברים. I want to thank you. All the best and have a great vacation on Vietnam.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks very much for having me on the webinar. It was a pleasure to do it.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you. אז ערב טוב, לילה טוב לכל הצופים, ונתראה בוובינר הבא. ביי, להתראות.
Okay, goodbye.
ביי ביי.